It was a rainy Friday morning. The kind of morning where the sky is a heavy, bruised gray and the air feels thick enough to swallow. I had just landed at the airport, the hum of the engine still vibrating in my bones, and all I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and forget about the sterile smell of the hospital for at least 48 hours. I was rushing through the terminal, my mind already halfway into a hot bath, when the world suddenly tilted. Then boom. The impact felt like hitting a brick wall. I tumbled back, my sneakers sliding on the polished floor, and landed hard. Both of our belongings fell on the floor. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking." But then I stopped mid-sentence as I looked up. Standing over me was a man who looked like he had been sculpted by an artist with a very specific, very dangerous vision. He was tall with broad shoulders that seemed to block out the terminal lights. He was an alpha. I could feel his pheromone scent before I even processed his face. He had a cold, sharp look, the kind that belonged on the cover of a high-end business magazine, with eyes that seemed to see right through the chaos of the airport. In my head, a traitorous voice whispered, "Felix, this is exactly what your dream man looks like." "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was a deep, mahogany rumble that sent a tiny shiver down my spine. He didn't wait for an answer. He reached down, offering a hand. His grip was firm and warm as he hoisted me back onto my feet like I weighed nothing at all. "I'm fine, really," I stammered, my face heating up as I smoothed down my coat. "Careful next time," he said shortly. His expression didn't soften, but he didn't look annoyed either. He just looked distant. I grabbed the handle of the black suitcase sitting on the floor close to where we were standing, and he did the same with the one next to him. With a final flustered apology, I turned and scurried away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back until I reached the coffee stand near the entrance gate. While waiting for my latte, I glanced toward the boarding area for the premium lounges. There he was again, Mr. Handsome. I watched him check in, his movements fluid and commanding. He was heading toward the same city I had just escaped from for my vacation. It felt like a strange twist of fate, seeing him move toward my life just as I was stepping away from it. I watched as he boarded the plane, disappearing into the tunnel. I sighed, leaning against the counter. A man like that lived in a completely different world than a floor nurse like me. The rain lashed against the giant glass windows, blurring the runway. I checked my watch, ready to head to the taxi stand when I saw something that made me freeze. The boarding bridge was still attached, but the cabin door reopened. Then Mr. Handsome stepped out of the airplane 2 minutes before the takeoff, his face pale, moving with a sudden, frantic urgency as if he had forgotten something important. I stood there, frozen by the gate, my latte cooling in my hand as I watched him. The urgency in his stride was jarring. This wasn't the cold, composed alpha from 10 minutes ago. This was a man possessed by a sudden, sharp desperation. My heart skipped a beat when his eyes locked onto mine across the terminal. He wasn't just walking, he was coming straight for me. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter, my mind racing. Had I dropped my wallet? Was there a problem with the flight? Before I could utter a word, he was in my space, his towering frame casting a shadow over me. His hand shot out, his fingers locking around my wrist in a grip of iron. It wasn't painful, but the sheer power behind it made my breath hitch. "Why did you do it?" he hissed, his voice no longer a smooth rumble but a jagged blade. "Why did you switch them? Were you planning to run hoping I wouldn't notice?" I blinked, my brain struggling to keep up. "What are you talking about?" "You're hurting me," I said defensively. "The suitcase," he said coldly, his eyes dark with a terrifying intensity. "Why did you switch my suitcase? Do you think that you could just steal from someone like me and go scot-free?" A wave of hot indignation washed over me, instantly melting my previous admiration. I pulled against his grip, my jaw tightening. The shock was being replaced by a stinging sense of insult. "Steal from you?" I retorted, my voice trembling with disgust. "I am a nurse. I spend my life helping people, not taking from them. I don't care how much money you clearly have, I would never steal a single cent from anyone, let alone a stranger in an airport." "Then explain why you're holding my suitcase," he challenged, his gaze flicking down to the black case by my side. Around us, the quiet hum of the terminal had died down. People were slowing their pace, heads turning, whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd. I felt the heat of a dozen stares crawling over my skin, making the air feel even thinner. "Open it," he commanded, releasing my wrist but hovering close, his scent now sharp with agitation overwhelming my senses. "Open it right now," he commanded. With shaking hands I knelt on the cold floor. My fingers fumbled with the latches. "Please let me find my belongings inside," I prayed. Immediately when I clicked the locks open and pulled the lid back, my heart dropped into my stomach. None of the items looked familiar. Instead, I saw rows of impeccably folded Italian silk shirts, a designer watch case, and a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my annual salary. My breath hitched. It really wasn't my suitcase. "I didn't know," I whispered, the reality of the mistake crashing down on me. "It was an accident," I pleaded, my voice rising in my defense. "We bumped into each other. Besides, the suitcases look exactly the same. I swear I could never steal anything." Mr. Handsome looked at me with those calm eyes as if judging my face to tell if I was innocent or not. "What's going on here?" A heavy hand landed on my shoulder. A security officer had arrived, alerted by the commotion. He didn't ask questions. He saw a flustered Omega over a suitcase full of luxury goods and an angry, powerful-looking alpha. He gripped my arm, pulling me upward. In the sudden jerk of the movement, the side pocket of my coat where I'd tucked a few personal items during the flight, snagged on the suitcase latch. A glossy piece of paper slid out, fluttering through the air like a falling leaf. "Wait." "The picture. Give it back." I reached out, but the officer held me firm. The alpha didn't wait. He stooped down, his long fingers hovering over the photo for a fraction of a second before he snatched it off the floor. I watched his face, expecting more anger. Instead, I saw him turn ghost white. His entire body went rigid, the air around him turning freezing cold. He looked at the photo, a picture of me in my blue hospital uniform, sitting on a hospital bed and hugging a little girl with bright eyes. He looked at the girl, then at me, then back at the girl. His hand started to shake so violently the photo rattled in his grip. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us until we were inches apart. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. "This girl?" he gasped, his voice breaking as he shoved the photo toward my face. "Where is she? Tell me right now, where is the girl in this picture?" The air in the terminal seemed to vibrate with the alpha's sudden raw desperation. I could feel his heat radiating off him, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile airport air. My heart was thumping against my ribs, partly from the shock of the accusation and partly from the way he was looking at me, like I was the only person in the world who held the answer to his questions. "She's my patient," I managed to whisper, my voice finally finding its way back to my throat. "I'm a pediatric nurse." His grip on the photo tightened so hard the edges crinkled. He choked out, his eyes searching mine with a terrifying intensity. "When did you last see her?" "Yesterday morning," I said, leaning back slightly as his presence began to overwhelm me. "Just before my departure. I went to say goodbye to her." The alpha's breath hitched. A flash of something like hope crossed his face so quickly it was hard to track. "Why are you asking?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at the picture again, his thumb brushing over the girl's face with a tenderness that didn't match his cold exterior. "Because the girl in this picture, she's my daughter. And she's been missing for a month." I felt the blood drain from my face. The security guard, still holding my arm, cleared his throat, looking confused by the sudden shift in tone. The alpha didn't even look at him. He simply raised a hand, his voice regaining that cold, commanding edge that brooked no argument. "You can leave, officer," he snapped. "There has been a misunderstanding. I will handle this personally." The security guard hesitated for a split second, then nodded and retreated, disappearing into the crowd. Before I could even process the silence, the alpha's hand found mine. He didn't grab me like a criminal this time. He pulled me, his touch firm and urgent, leading me away from the prying eyes of the terminal and into a quiet, shadowed alcove behind a row of closed check-in counters. He stood so close I could feel the rise and fall of his chest. The cedarwood scent of his pheromones mixed with cologne was dizzying, making me feel breathless in a way that had nothing to do with the suitcase. We were in a bubble of heavy silence, the distant airport announcements fading into a dull hum. "I've been living in a nightmare for 30 days, he said, his voice low and ragged. "We were traveling through the northern woods. There was an accident. A storm, a landslide. The car went off the road. When I regained consciousness, the back door was open and she was gone. I thought she'd wandered off, hoping someone had found her. I've spent every second since then burning through every resource I have to find her." He leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing me. "I finally got a lead," he continued, "a track that placed her in a small village near the hospital district a week ago. I was heading there now to follow the trail." I looked up at him, my mind spinning. He looked sincere, haunted even, but as a nurse I had to be sure. "How can I know you're telling the truth?" I asked softly. "How do I know you're really her father?" He didn't get angry. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. With trembling fingers, he swiped through the gallery. He held the screen up to my face. It was a flood of memories. The little girl laughing on a swing set while he pushed her. The two of them covered in flour while baking, and finally, a photo taken in a car. She was wearing a bright yellow raincoat with little ducklings on the buttons. The exact same outfit she had been wearing the night she was brought into our emergency room, torn and muddy. I stood there, stunned into a heavy silence. She was the daughter of the rich alpha standing inches away from me. The overhead speakers crackled to life, the chime cutting through the heavy silence of our alcove like a physical blow. "Final boarding call for Flight 208. All remaining passengers, please proceed to Gate B12 immediately. Doors will close in 3 minutes." But Mr. Handsome didn't even flinch. His eyes remained locked on mine, dark and desperate. "That's my flight," he whispered, though he made no move to leave. "But it doesn't matter. Nothing matters but her. You are the only person who has seen her. You're the only one who can lead me to her before the trail goes cold again," he said in a soft, desperate tone. He took a step closer, his presence so overwhelming I had to press my back against the cold marble pillar. "I'll give you anything," he urged, his voice dropping to a frantic, low rumble. "Whatever you want. Name a price. 100,000? A million? I will write the check right now if you turn around and get on a private charter with me." I felt a sharp sting of irritation. The magic of his handsome face flickered, replaced by the cold reality of his world. I let out a dry, hollow laugh. "You see, that's the problem with people like you," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You think every soul has a price tag. You think you can just buy a person's time, their life, and their compassion like it's another piece of real estate." His jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. "I'm only trying to find my daughter. I'm not trying to be an elitist," he said. "I'd go with you for free without a second thought if I could. But I didn't come back here for a vacation. My mother is sick. I haven't seen her in months, and the only reason I'm standing in this airport is to get to her bedside. She's the only family I have left. I can't just leave like that." The desperation in his eyes turned into a flicking flame of anxiety. He looked toward the gate, then back at me. "If I let you walk out of this airport, how do I know you'll come back? How do I know you won't disappear or decide it's too much trouble? I can't lose this lead. I won't." I sighed, rubbing my temples. The stress of the flight, the suitcase, and now this man was starting to make my head throb. "Look, I'll give you my number. I'll give you my address. I'm a nurse, not a ghost." "That's not enough," he said, his voice suddenly settling into a terrifyingly calm resolve. "I'm worried you won't show up. If you want to see your mother, fine. But I'm staying with you until we leave for that hospital." I scoffed, crossing my arms over my chest. "Are you serious? You're a billionaire or a CEO or whatever you are. You have a flight to catch. You have a life. You're telling me you're going to follow a random nurse to a tiny apartment to visit his sick mom?" I expected him to scoff back. I expected him to realize how ridiculous he sounded and back off, offering me a business card instead. But the alpha didn't blink. He reached down, grabbed the handle of his suitcase and stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "Yes," he said firmly. "Lead the way." I stood there stunned. The most powerful-looking man I had ever met was ready to ditch his first-class ticket just to keep me in his sight. My heart gave a strange, fluttering thump against my ribs. We boarded a taxi thereafter. The ride was a blur of rain-streaked windows and a silence so heavy it felt physical. I sat pressed against the door, clutching my own suitcase to my chest like a shield. "What's your name?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Call me James," he replied. "That's it? No title, no last name, simply James. Well, at least he has a name." I mumbled softly. I looked at him sideways. His profile was stunning. His gaze fixed on the passing city lights. "I'm Felix Anderson," I said softly, trying to break the tension. He didn't flinch. He didn't even turn his head. "I know," he replied, his voice a low vibration. "It's boldly written on your ID." I turned away, displeased with his response. "I'm quite sure he has zero communication skills," I told myself. He didn't ask about anything else. It was clear that to him I was just a map. I was the bridge to his daughter, and nothing else in this world seemed to register in his mind except that. When the taxi finally pulled up to my mother's small apartment on the outskirts of the city, I practically scrambled out of the car. I was bracing myself for a scene of heartbreak. Oxygen tanks, pale skin, a weak voice. But as we walked toward the gate, I froze. My mother was in the small front garden, humming to herself as she trimmed the hedges with a pair of shears. She looked vibrant, her cheeks flushed with the morning air. "Mom," I gasped, dropping my bag. "Are you okay?" She turned around, a bright smile lighting up her face. "Felix. Oh, my sweet boy, you're finally home." She rushed over to hug me. "Mom, I thought you were sick," I pulled back, checking her forehead. "Uncle told me you were bedridden and couldn't move. I had to come home immediately. I've been worried sick since then." She let out a mischievous little laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "That old fox. It was all a little plan, Felix. I had a tiny fever last week, but I'm perfectly fine now. I just knew if I didn't say something dramatic, you'd keep working those double shifts at the hospital and never come see me." I groaned, burying my face in my hands. I had dragged a grieving, high-powered alpha across the country for a little fever. Behind me I felt the air shift. James was standing by the gate, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene with a nonchalant, unreadable expression. My mother's eyes traveled past me, widening as they landed on him. "And who is this?" she asked, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that was definitely too loud. "Is this your boyfriend, Felix? He's quite the catch." "Mom, you're getting it all wrong," I hissed, practically trying to clamp my hand over her mouth. "He's not my boyfriend. He's looking for his daughter. There was a mix-up at the airport. I have to go with him tomorrow morning to show him where she is." To my surprise, James didn't look annoyed. He stepped forward, his cold expression easing into something remarkably polite, almost gentle. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said, bowing his head slightly. "How are you feeling?" "You can call me Maria, dear," my mum said, beaming at him. She stepped closer, reaching out to pat his arm with a motherly instinct that seemed to bypass his intimidating aura. "Don't you worry. I believe you will find your little girl soon. My Felix is a good boy, the best nurse in the world. If she was in his care, then definitely she is safe." I felt the heat rush to my face, a deep blush crawling up my neck as James looked at me, his dark eyes lingering a second longer than usual. "Let's get inside," I muttered, grabbing my bag and ushering them toward the door before my mother could say anything else embarrassing. It's been a long day. The kitchen was soon filled with the mouth-watering aroma of my mother's signature spicy stew and steamed dumplings. For a moment, the heavy weight of the airport drama vanished, replaced by the clinking of silverware. James sat at our small wooden table, looking absurdly out of place in his tailored trousers, but he ate with a quiet, focused respect that made my mother beam. "You know, Felix," my mom said, waving a chopstick for emphasis, "you missed all the excitement while you were gone. 2 months ago, 3 thugs tried to break in through the back window. I nearly choked on my dumpling." "Really? Mom, why didn't you tell me?" She let out a snort, flexing a modest bicep. "So you could worry? Please. I caught the first one with the frying pan and kicked the second one so hard in the shins he started crying for his own mother. They ran away so fast they left a shoe behind. I kept it as a trophy. I burst out laughing, leaning back in my chair. I looked over at James, whose fork was frozen halfway to his mouth. "Don't look so worried, James," I chuckled. My mom is the undisputed heavyweight champion of cracking jokes. To my surprise, James's lips actually twitched into the faint shadow of a smile. He let out a low, huffed laugh, the first real human sound I'd heard from him. "I'll make sure to stay on her good side then," he rumbled. By the time night fell and the rain returned to drum against the roof, the atmosphere had shifted from playful to stifling. My mother had already retreated to her room, leaving me to host an alpha CEO in my tiny living quarters. I knocked on the bathroom door, holding a fresh, fluffy towel. "James? I have your towel." The door swung slightly with him popping his head out through the door. He leaned close, steam curling around his damp hair, his chest bare and glistening with droplets of water. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat too long neither of us moved. A sharp, electric shiver raced down my spine, making my toes curl against the cold linoleum. "Thanks," he said, his voice dropping an octave as he took the towel, his fingers brushing against mine. I practically fled to my bedroom. "Get it together, Felix," I hissed to myself. My room was small, basically just a desk and a single albeit wide bed. I looked at the floor, then at the window. The floor is going to be freezing after that rain. I should give him the bed, but man, I'm going to wake up feeling like a pretzel. James walked in a few minutes later, smelling of my cheap soap and that expensive pheromone scent of his. The room felt 10 times smaller. "You can have the bed," I said quickly, my voice a pitch higher than usual. "I'll head to the sitting room." James paused, drying his hair. "Are you sure? I don't want to kick you out of your own room. I can take the couch." The couch. I thought, a mental image of the living room flashing in my mind. There is an entire army of mosquitoes out there just waiting for fresh alpha-grade blood. "No," I blurted out. "I mean, the mosquitoes are vicious out there. You'd be devoured. I'll just sleep on the floor here. It's fine." James frowned, looking at the thin rug on the hardwood floor. "Felix, you are my only hope of finding my daughter. If you sleep on that floor and catch a fever, we're both in trouble. I'm not letting you get sick." He looked at the bed, then back at me. It was a wide bed, meant for one but could fit two if they stayed on their own sides. "Let's just share it," James said, his tone turning into that no-argument, alpha command. "It's big enough for 2 people. We're adults." "Share a bed? With him?" I screamed internally. "I'm literally going to die of a heart attack before sunrise." But I nodded mutely, too tired to fight. I turned off the light and waited until I heard his breathing go deep and steady before I crawled under the covers, sticking to the very edge of the mattress. I lay there in the dark, my heart hammering like a drum. I turned my head slightly, catching the silhouette of his side profile in the moonlight. He looked so peaceful. The cold look finally replaced by the softness of sleep. He was breathtakingly handsome, even more so when he wasn't barking orders. I found myself staring, tracing the line of his jaw with my eyes, wondering how such a powerful man could look so vulnerable. For the first time since the airport, the fear was gone, replaced by a strange, fluttering warmth I wasn't ready to name. The morning sun was peering through the curtains when I finally began to drift back to consciousness. I felt warm, unusually warm, and my leg was hooked over something solid and muscular. I sighed into the pillow, thinking it was my extra-large body pillow back at my apartment, and gave it a little squeeze. Then the pillow let out a low, amused huff. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't hugging a pillow. I was sprawled across James like a climbing vine. My leg was draped over his hip, and my arm was tucked firmly against his chest. James was leaning against the headboard, perfectly calm, scrolling through his phone with one hand while the other rested dangerously close to my waist. "Morning," he rumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I scrambled backward so fast I nearly tumbled off the edge of the mattress. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to colonize your personal space like that," I pleaded. James didn't look bothered. If anything, there was a tiny, mischievous glint in his eyes. Relax, Felix. You look like you finally caught some decent rest. I wasn't going to wake you up. I glanced at the digital clock on my bedside table and nearly had a heart attack. 7 a.m. We have to get to the airport right now or we'll never get a flight back until dusk. I was halfway to the closet, clutching my towel and brush in a panic, when his calm voice cut through my frenzy. I already took care of it, he said, not even looking up from his screen. I booked our tickets 20 minutes ago. The flight is at 10 a.m. We have exactly 2 hours to eat, pack, and get to the terminal. Sit down before you trip over your own feet. I froze, one sock in my hand. 2 hours? But last-minute tickets are impossible to get, especially this morning. He just raised an eyebrow as if the word, impossible, didn't exist in his vocabulary. We walked into the kitchen, the air already thick with the heavenly scent of frying dough and savory spices. My mom was practically dancing around the stove, humming a tune. She's at it again, I whispered to James, leaning in close. My mom used to own a restaurant back in the day. She's a culinary wizard. She honestly believes she can solve all the world's problems with a well-timed bowl of good meals. James watched her with a look of genuine admiration. I noticed, he said. Honestly, I have top-tier private chefs on my payroll back home, and even they couldn't replicate the soul in her cooking. My brain tripped over the words, top-tier private chefs. Not just one chef but chefs on a payroll. Every time I forgot for a second that he was a titan of industry, he'd drop a line like that to remind me that he was rich. After a breakfast that felt more like a feast, it was time to go. My mum stood at the gate, wiping her hands on her apron. She grabbed James's hand, looking him straight in the eye with that fierce motherly look of hers. When you find that precious girl, she said firmly, remember to bring her here. I want to see her happy eating my dumplings. Promise me, James. James's cold mask didn't just crack, it vanished. He gave her a soft, sincere smile and squeezed her hand back. I promise. I'll bring her. And just like that, I hugged my mum and we left. The taxi ride back to the airport returned us to that familiar silence, but it wasn't the jagged, angry silence from yesterday. When we finally reached the check-in counter, James handed over our IDs. The agent's eyes widened and she immediately straightened her posture. Right this way, Mr. Sterling. Your first-class suite is ready for boarding. I pulled James aside as we walked toward the VIP line. But getting there I was stunned beyond words. First class? I gasped dramatically. James, an economy seat is fine. It's a short flight and I don't want you spending too much. He stopped, turning to look at me. The way he stood there, surrounded by the chaos of the airport while looking like he owned the building, was intimidating all over again. Felix, he said, his voice dropping to that silky, commanding tone. Your satisfaction is my priority right now. You are the only person who can take me to my daughter. If I want you to sit in a seat that reclines into a bed and serve champagne, I will pay for it. In fact, I can pay for as many seats as I want just to ensure no one sits near us. Now walk. I opened my mouth to argue, realized I was talking to a man who probably had a favorite private jet, and promptly shut it. First class it is then, I thought, following him. At least the snacks will be better. The plane cut through the clouds with a steady, quiet hum, the engine vibration barely a whisper in the luxury of the first-class cabin. Despite the plush leather and the space, the air between us felt heavy. I looked at James. He was staring out the window, his jaw set so tight I thought it might shatter. James? I asked softly, breaking the silence. Your company. Who's looking after things while you're here? A man like you must have 1,000 things that need his attention every hour. James let out a short, hollow scoff, not even turning his head. Nothing else matters, Felix. My company can burn to the ground for all I care as long as I get her back. She is the only thing I have that's real. He finally turned to me and for the first time I saw the cracks in his armor. His eyes were shadowed with an old, deep-seated pain. 3 years ago, he began, his voice dropping to a low, jagged rasp. Shortly after my daughter was born, I found out my partner was cheating on me. I was broken. I'd built a life on a foundation of lies. He paused, his throat bobbing. The only thing that kept me from falling apart was the DNA test. I was so terrified. but was grateful when both DNAs matched. She was mine. I lost my partner, but I didn't lose her. Since the divorce, my daughter has been my world. I would die for her without a second thought. He leaned back, closing his eyes as if he were reliving the nightmare. The very day everything happened, I had a business meeting in the north. I wasn't supposed to take her with me, but I was going to be gone for 3 days. I was scared, Felix. Scared that my ex would use my absence to take her away again. So I took her with me. On the way back, the road was slick. The car spun. It wasn't a high-speed crash, but it was enough to cause damages. James instinctively touched his chest, his fingers tracing a spot beneath his shirt. I took a hard hit to the ribs. When I regained consciousness, the back door was hanging open. The car seat was empty. She was gone. I screamed her name until my lungs bled, but the woods just swallowed up my voice. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, James concluded. I looked down at my hands, the memories of that night flooding back. I was walking home that evening, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I usually take the shortcut near the woods. It was so quiet. Until I heard it. A tiny, broken voice crying for her daddy. I looked at James and I could feel the tears prickling my eyes. I ran toward the sound. When I found her, she was huddled under a tree, bleeding from a cut on her forehead. She looked so small, James. So scared. I didn't even think, I just scooped her up and ran all the way to the hospital. I said, trying my best not to cry. But a single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. She wouldn't stop crying, I continued. Even when we were cleaning her wound, she kept reaching out, sobbing that someone had to save her daddy. She kept pointing back toward the trees, but she was so little, so disoriented. We didn't know where the accident was. We searched the nearby roads, but we found nothing, I said quietly. The silence that followed was suffocating, filled only with the sound of my quiet sniffling. Suddenly I felt a large, warm hand cover mine. James squeezed my fingers, his grip firm and grounding. You saved her, he said, his voice trembling with a raw, powerful gratitude. I'm glad you helped save my little one. He leaned in, his eyes burning with an intense. I promise you, Felix. Once we find her, once I hold her again, I am going to reward you. I will make sure you and your mother never have to worry about a single thing for the rest of your lives. I looked at our joined hands, the weight of his promise and the shared pain of that night pulling us closer than I ever thought possible. Under the hum of the airplane, in the middle of the sky, I realized I wasn't just helping a stranger anymore. I was helping a father find his lost hope. The moment the wheels touched the tarmac, the tension in the cabin reached a breaking point. James didn't wait for the usual pleasantries. We were off the plane and into a waiting car before the other passengers had even unbuckled. We sped toward the orphanage, a quiet building nestled on the edge of the hospital grounds where the children waited for a miracle. As we burst through the front doors, the middle-aged receptionist looked up, her glasses sliding down her nose. Felix? I thought you were halfway across the country on your break. Change of plans, Mrs. Gable, I panted, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stepped aside, gesturing to the man towering behind me. I have the best news possible. This is James Sterling. He's Belle's father. The woman's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling up instantly. Oh, thank heaven. We've been praying for him to come soon. She didn't waste another second, grabbing her keys and leading us toward the playroom. Through the glass doors I saw the children. Most were running around, shouting and playing with colorful blocks. But in the corner, sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench, was Belle. She looked so small, her eyes fixed on the door as if she had been waiting for this exact moment for 30 days. James let out a choked, broken sound. The man who looked like he could command armies was now trembling, tears almost streaming down his face. Belle, he whispered. The little girl looked up. Her eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then she let out a piercing scream of joy. Daddy. She scrambled off the bench, her little legs moving as fast as they could. James dropped to his knees, catching her in a hug so tight it felt like they were merging into one person. I've got you, baby. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, he sobbed into her hair. I stood back, wiping my eyes, but Belle peeked over her father's shoulder and saw me. "Nurse Felix." I knelt down as she wriggled out of James's grip just long enough to throw her arms around my neck. "I knew you'd find him," she whispered in my ear. "You are my superhero." I looked at her and smiled back. "And you are my angel." After the whirlwind of paperwork and final goodbyes, the journey back felt like a dream. On the flight home, James was a different man. The cold, sharp edges had melted away. He didn't let Belle go for a second, holding her in his arms and showing her the mountain of toys and clothes he'd already ordered from his phone. He even insisted on buying me a new designer watch and a laptop, despite my protests. When we landed, 3 sleek black SUVs were waiting on the tarmac. I thought we were going to a house, but as we drove through massive iron gates and up a winding path, I realized we were entering a private estate. "James, where are we?" I asked, staring at the manicured gardens and fountains. "Home," he said simply. The front doors of the mansion opened, revealing a living room that looked like a palace. Polished marble floors reflected the glow of massive crystal chandeliers, and the ceiling was so high it felt like being in a cathedral. "Feel at home, Felix," James said, finally looking relaxed. "Everything here is yours to use." That night, Belle refused to leave my side. She followed me like a little shadow, eventually falling asleep in the guest suite with her head on my lap. James stood in the doorway, watching us with a look of pure, unadulterated happiness. The next morning, the reality of my life came knocking. I had a job, a mother to check on, and a world that didn't involve marble floors. I packed my small bag and met James in the foyer. He pulled out an envelope, his expression serious. "Felix, I want you to have this. It's a drop in the bucket compared to what you've given me, but it will make sure you never have to work another day." I looked at the check. It was a sum so large my brain couldn't even process the zeros. I pushed his hand back. "No, James. I didn't save her for a paycheck. I saved her because it was the right thing to do." James looked stunned, but before he could argue, a small hand tugged on my scrubs. "Don't go, Felix," Belle pleaded, her bottom lip trembling. "Move in with us. Stay forever. You can be my mummy." The air in the room turned still. I looked at James, who was watching me with an unreadable, intense gaze, and then back at the little girl who had become my whole world over the last month. I gave her a sad, gentle smile. "Oh, sweetie, I don't think I'm good enough for a life like this. I'm just a nurse." Belle's face crumpled. I turned away before I could change my mind, walking out of the mansion and into the morning mist. As the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, I felt a hollow ache in my chest, wondering if I had just walked away from the family I never knew I wanted. The following morning, the sun was just beginning to burn through the dew when a persistent rhythmic knocking echoed through my mother's small apartment. I stumbled out of bed, rubbing my eyes, wondering who could be visiting so early. I pulled open the door and my heart nearly stopped. James stood by the entrance, looking strikingly handsome in a casual linen shirt, with Belle perched on his hip. She was beaming, her eyes sparkling with a secret she couldn't wait to share. "Nurse Felix," she chirped, reaching out her small arms. "Daddy said yes. He said you can be my mummy now and you never have to leave us again." I stood there, completely dumbfounded, my mouth hanging open. I looked up at James, searching for a sign that this was a joke, but his expression was more serious and tender than I had ever seen it. "She's right, Felix," James said, his voice steady and warm. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who wanted my title or my money. But in that hospital and in this house I saw the truth. You genuinely cared for my daughter. I don't trust anyone else with her heart, or mine." Before I could find my voice, my mother stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, don't just stand there catching flies, Felix. Invite them in." "I am so happy to see you both," my mother said, beaming at Belle. The rest of the morning was a beautiful chaos. We sat around our small wooden table, laughing and sharing stories like a family that had been together for decades. The coldness that once defined James had completely melted away, replaced by the light of a man who had finally found his missing pieces. The month that followed felt like a fever dream, the kind you never want to wake up from. James didn't just change my life, he transformed everyone I loved. He bought my mother a beautiful state-of-the-art restaurant in the heart of the city, staffing it with high-skilled chefs who treated her like a queen. She finally had the kitchen of her dreams. He didn't forget where Belle had waited for him either. James sent truckloads of organic food, educational toys, and clothes to the orphanage. He even personally oversaw the replacement of every single old, creaky bed with foam mattresses, ensuring every child there slept as soundly as Belle did. As I watched the joy he spread, I couldn't help but think, it is true what they say. Good deeds are like seeds. You plant them in the dark and they grow into something bigger than you ever imagined. One golden afternoon, the three of us sat on a silk blanket in the middle of a sun-drenched meadow. Belle was busy chasing butterflies, her laughter ringing out like music. James turned to me, the sunlight catching the sharp angles of his face, and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Felix," he whispered, his hand trembling slightly as he took mine. "You saved my daughter, but you also saved me. Will you marry me and make this little family of mine beam with happiness forever?" I felt the heat rush to my cheeks, a deep, beautiful blush spreading as I looked into his eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "1,000 times yes." He smiled and pulled me into a warm hug. Our wedding was the event of the year, a lavish, flower-filled ceremony that felt like a fairy tale. But the best part wasn't the champagne or the grand ballroom. It was the moment the party ended and we returned to our home. James swept me up into his arms, his strength effortless as he carried me over the threshold. He walked into our new decorated bedroom and gently placed me on the soft silk sheets. As he leaned down to press a lingering, sweet kiss to my lips and my body, I knew my journey from that rainy airport had finally led me exactly where I was meant to be. We spent the rest of our lives living happily ever after, and also giving Belle a little brother who we named Ramsey.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this story till the end. I'm so happy, and there's a particular word Felix said that is going to stick with me for a long time. He said that good deeds are like seeds. You plant them in the dark and they eventually grow into something that you never imagined. So if this story brought a smile on your face today, please give this video a thumbs up, like my video, comments, let me know your favorite parts of the story. I really did put in a lot of work in this story, so please leave a comment, and if you're new here, don't hesitate to hit the subscribe button. Thank you all so much for watching. See you next time.